Blog Talk Radio. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Medlock Post radio show. This is where we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are those of the host and guests. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. Thank you for joining the show today, and here is your host, Richard G. Medlock.
Ayn Rand told us in 8 words. She gives us great advice. Ayn Rand: strive to be a victor, not a victim. Great counsel from a person who understood the difference between communism and capitalism, who lived under both and escaped communism to get to capitalism, and was frustrated by Americans that could not see the difference and kept falling under the spell of the Marxist, whatever you want to call it. Mystique. That's a good word. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard G. Medlock, the Medlock Post radio show. We're here today on January 6th, episode 99, The Wisdom of Calvin Coolidge. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the 30th President of the United States, who doesn't get talked about a whole lot. Now, how many of you thought of something when I said January 6th? How many of you thought of 2 years ago and what happened on this date 2 years ago in the Capitol? I bet you not that many of you, because it's basically been overblown. It was a contrived situation. It's been proven to be contrived, but the media won't talk about it. But guess what Nancy Pelosi is doing today? She's going to have a big celebration for January 6th. I guess she's trying to keep her persona alive for some reason. I don't know. She has a hard time fading away into the woodwork. Jobs report came out this morning for December. 223,000. Oh, we have this great, strong labor market. 223,000 a month is not a very strong labor market. I can tell you that right now. This is the media hyping all this stuff, trying to make Biden's policies look good. There's a downside to this. Smaller wage gains in the month of December. Although inflation is still going, right? And it's going to get worse. Folks, have you seen gasoline? The price of gasoline in our area right here in the last 2 weeks has gone up 30 cents a gallon. Now, watch the numbers on this. Watch the numbers, because when Biden took office to where it is today, it's still high. It's still over 100% high. So, well, maybe, about 75 to 100%. I don't have my numbers in front of me. But it's been up to $4 plus per gallon, and it's come down from that. So they're oh, yeah, no. Are they going to put this 30 cents or the increase back into inflation, or are they going to say, well, look, we put that in before when it was at $4 a gallon. We can't double dip here. You see how they play these number games? This is how they do it, folks. So this is the number games they play. Strive to be a victor, not a victim. 8 words to remember from Ayn Rand, among other things from her. Read her books, read her essays. They're great studies. And I don't agree with everything she puts out there, but a lot of it I do. It's good, down-to-earth common sense. And we need a whole lot of that in this world today. I'm sure some of you out there are saying, Richard, are you going to talk about the elephant in the room? Oh, you mean what's going on in the House of Representatives with the Republicans? Is it really an elephant in the room? This is how government works. Debate. Yeah, we're going to get to that after the wisdom of Calvin Coolidge to try to put some things into perspective about the Founding Fathers, the Constitution, conservatism, balanced budgets, taxes, and everything that's going on that's not being addressed today by our federal government and a lot of state governments. Now, Calvin Coolidge is an overlooked president. He got squeezed in there between Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. And they were all progressives, believed in progressivism. Woodrow Wilson believed in a one world order. He tried for months to get at the Versailles Treaty to get a one world order, failed, thank goodness. He was able, his advisors were able to get the League of Nations started, which turned into the United Nations, which I don't think there's anything united about it. And the nations that are really running it are dictatorships and so forth. I've been saying since the 1970s, get rid of it, get out of it, and the United States just walk away, stop funding it, get them out of the United States, let them go pay rent somewhere else if they even pay rent. Anyway, what a waste. What a waste. Calvin Coolidge, 30th president from 1923 to 1929. Now, a lot of people used to mock him because he took afternoon naps. Now, he was born in 1872, July 4th, 1872. So he wasn't that old, but he had a habit of taking a nap. And that's probably not a bad thing, folks. Japanese do it, or the Japanese do it, and the Mexicans used to do it. I don't know if they still do the siesta time. Remember that? No, I don't know. Who knows what's going on with that? I hadn't heard that word in a long time. But he took a nap. But Coolidge was not a slothful president. He worked diligently, and he relied heavily on his cabinet. He put good people around him, but he would devote serious attention to what came across his desk. He would address it. I know you're probably comparing this now to what's sitting at the White House and drawing some comparisons. Do that, even to other presidents that have sat there. But his view of the presidency, like that of Harding Roosevelt, who was immediately before him, marked a departure from the activism of Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Coolidge's political philosophy and personal temperament conveniently aligned in his belief that the president should not undertake sweeping new reforms to address the challenges of the modern industrial age. He favored instead a hands-off leadership style and a restrained view of the executive, delegating tasks to his cabinet, leaving most issues to the states to resolve, and even on federal matters, frequently deeming restraint to be the wiser course than bold action. So he believed in small federal government, let the states take care of their situations. Now, Coolidge was not a reactionary. He's better known, I think, if we look at this, 1923, as a transitional figure between the 19th century and the 20th century. He embodied the small town values of thrift and industry and a philosophy of minimal government. But at the same time, he celebrated the economic boom over which he presided, and he embraced the new media of the modern culture. Now, so he could take things from the past, learn from them, apply them to the present, but also have a vision of new things that are coming and how it can benefit the future. Isn't it sad that a lot of people in government today don't have that vision? Applying good principles from the past, from history, applying it to today to make a good today, but a vision to see things working to better tomorrow. That's a great philosophy. That's a great outline to live your own life. Now, sometimes we look at Coolidge's domestic legacy as described as conservative. And he was conservative. He was a constitutional conservative. He believed in the founding fathers. He believed in the principles of the Constitution. Now, his main concern at the time was to sustain the economic prosperity that was returning when he took office. Harding was a conservative. He favored a light hand in regulating business. Oh, what a relief. We don't need the federal government regulating business. He didn't like that. He strove hard to balance the budget, even coming to a surplus in the federal government. How about that, folks? It can be done. The national debt. His fiscal restraint led him to veto two bills. Both were popular in Congress that would have given bonuses to veterans, only to see them passed with two-thirds majority. Now, we can go back and debate that, but it depends on what was in that bill. You see? If we go back and look at that, and in that bill it was to give the federal government more authority, then that's probably why he vetoed it. And you still had a lot of people in Congress. You still had some people that were embracing Marxism in Congress. And they wanted bigger government. The centerpiece of his domestic agenda was tax cutting. He championed the Revenue Acts of 1924 and 26. And this was a pet issue of his Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon. Now, he was a wealthy Pittsburgh industrialist who his philosophy was the trickle-down economics. Now that works. Reagan proved it worked. Trump proved it works. The Democratic Marxists don't like it. But let's remember at this time, he was fighting three things here. He was fighting more, but the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. The income tax, or the Internal Revenue Service, was established in 1913. And state senators were now elected by the populace instead of being elected by the state legislatures. Not appointed by the governor, but by the state legislatures to go to Washington and protect states' rights from the House of Representatives. So he had these things that he was trying to control, to minimize the effect of those things. The Revenue Act sharply reduced income taxes, sharply, especially surtaxes on the wealthy, and then they cut gift tax, exercise, inheritance taxes. At the time, many observers credited the cuts for what was widely called the Coolidge prosperity: robust growth, rising wages, declining unemployment and inflation, and a bull market. Let me read those again. It's called the Coolidge prosperity: robust growth, rising wages, declining unemployment, and declining inflation, and a bull market. Now, those five things right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 5 of them were all going under Trump. We had robust growth, rising wages, declining unemployment and inflation, and a bull market. We had that under Trump. So the Coolidge prosperity works. His plans was working. Cut taxes, cut regulations, cut all these other inheritance taxes, whatever's out there. Let the people do with their money what they deem best, and let businesses be able to have the money to reinvest and to grow businesses and to hire people and to increase wages. It works, folks. These conditions probably had more to do with the effects of wartime spending and economic mobilization several years later, or several years before. Coolidge didn't like war. Now, a lot of people have tried to blame Coolidge for setting up all the conditions for the 1929 Depression. But let me tell you something, folks. It wasn't Coolidge. It's Herbert Hoover's policies. He was on Hoover was on his cabinet. Hoover kept pushing these policies, which led to it. Now, Coolidge was trying to keep the momentum going. He didn't want to start putting restrictions on things. You had great investment opportunities at the time. But remember, you had the Federal Reserve starting to play its games. That added to the crash. Herbert Hoover called in the loans on all the banks. That's a whole lesson within itself. Tripping the stock market to crash and on. Now, back then, you could buy stocks with 10% margin. Today, it's 50%. 10%, 10 cents on the dollar. You could put down 10 cents, you could buy a dollar stock. So there wasn't much downside when a margin call came in. And that's what happened here. Again, that's another thing. But his policy was a hands-off regulatory policy. So they want to put the blame on Coolidge for the 1929 Depression when it was actually some people in his cabinet pushing policies, and also the Federal Reserve, which he had no control over. Remember, the Federal Reserve is not a federal agency. It's a standalone free bank that's not supposed to play politics, etc. There were issues with the farmers. Now, Coolidge, they say he failed to address the worsening economic plight of farmers. There was a bill proposed, and it was kind of a panacea. It was called the McNary Huganism, based on a proposal back in 1929 that would have established a government corporation to buy surplus crops at artificially set prices and then hold it until prices rose and they sell it or they use it. Guess what, folks? That doesn't work. When you get government involved. So later on, though, the government got involved with subsidized farming, and you can see what's happened from there. So Coolidge wanted to stay out of that mess, and he vetoed the bill, and the Congress didn't override it. So they were saying, oh, that contributed to the Great Depression. You know, they kept pointing to him. He was a great president. He was trying to follow the Constitution the best he could. Now, let's talk about Herbert Hoover, who was his Secretary of Commerce, who then became president. And he was considered at the time a fairly activist and progressive in his views. He fell into that mold of Wilson and Roosevelt. Progressivism, Marxism, socialism. He fell into that. Now, Hoover established a new regulatory regime in the emerging industry of radio. Now, back then, it was just coming into its own. Created the Radio Act and set up the Federal Radio Commission, later the Federal Communications Commission, to regulate the airways. It declared that all airways are public. They're public property and subject to government control. You see that government control? Those are two words we do not want to hear, is government control. And Coolidge tried to stay away from that. Now, he did. There was a massive Mississippi River flood in 1927, and he did give in there for the federal government to help aid the states. Now, that was the largest natural disaster up into Hurricane Katrina. He felt, let the states take care of themselves. But it was so massive, so he did, okay, let's give some money to help them out. That's fine, folks, but do it within a budget. You see where we're going with this? Have you started drawing parallels with what Coolidge was standing for, what the Constitution stands for, and what's happening today? Can you see these parallels? I hope so. The wisdom of Calvin Coolidge. Now, he had a strong belief on the principles of federalism. Now, how many of you are sitting out there going, federalism? Is that where the federal government controls everything? It is just the opposite, folks. Go read the Federalist Papers. It is where the states control their destiny. The federal government operates under the bounds of the Constitution, a limited role. Well, it's not very limited anymore, is it? So you have a lot of limelight in the media and movies and so forth on the Roosevelts, Teddy and Franklin, and Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover, but not a lot about Calvin Coolidge. Now, Calvin Coolidge was a contrast to the Roosevelts, even though Teddy was a Republican and Franklin was a Democrat. They had a lot of the same views. And Calvin Coolidge not only believed in constitutional limited government, but his political philosophy was rooted in the beliefs of the American founding, which they don't teach anymore. After the Great War, World War I, the politics of the nation turned in a more conservative direction as the Republicans swept the White House in the presidential election of 1920 with the victory of Warren G. Harding, and Calvin Coolidge was his vice president. Both Harding and Coolidge believed in a more conservative view of presidential power that reflected the philosophy of President William Howard Taft rather than that of President Theodore Roosevelt or President Woodrow Wilson. So they're going back to the Constitution, folks. When we say conservative, it means we're going back to conservative principles in the Constitution. Harding and Coolidge also believed that a strong federal government was not the best policy direction for the nation, especially in a severe economic downturn such as the Depression of 1920 and 21. But you never heard of that one, huh? Which occurred in the aftermath of World War I. Now, President Harding, who called for a return to normalcy during the 1920 campaign, pushed a conservative agenda based on reducing spending. Get this, folks. Reducing spending, lowering tax rates, and paying off the national debt, which at that time was just in the millions of dollars. Now we're at almost $32 billion. Now, President Harding died early, and Calvin Coolidge became president, and he continued the normalcy program by further implementing spending and tax reduction and paying down the national debt. So he and Harding were on the same page, trying to do the same thing. Coolidge also believed in limiting the role of the federal government, and he was a believer in the traditional view of federalism. And this is what he said, quote, "While we ought to glory in the Union and remember that it is the source from which the states derive their chief title to fame, we must also recognize that the national administration is not and cannot be adjusted to the needs of local government. It is too far away to be informed of local needs, too inaccessible to be responsive to local conditions. The states should not be induced by coercion or by favor to surrender management of their own affairs. The federal government ought to resist the tendency to be loaded up with duties which the states should perform. It does not follow that because something ought to be done, the national government ought to do it." Unquote. This is the Federalist philosophy. Let the states do it. That's the way the Constitution set it up. Read Amendment 10 to the Constitution. Read the Constitution. It limits federal government, and everything else goes to the states. And he spells it out here. Need to be administrating something that's 1,000 miles away. Those states can take care of themselves. and they should not be induced by coercion or by favor to surrender management of their own affairs. Folks, that happened through money. States now are on federal government welfare. We've talked about that many times before. Just because there's a problem doesn't mean the national government should jump in and take over. But that's exactly what they have done since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Even Herbert Hoover. They've jumped in. You know, what is the phrase? Don't let a crisis go to waste. Well, that's what they're doing. And they create a lot of the crises that we see where they come in and set up all these new regulations, all the new laws, and they take over. Government control. Historian Paul Marino wrote that as president, he, Coolidge, often observed that demands for unconstitutional federal laws arose from the state's failure to act, presumably on such matters as child labor and education. Well, historian Paul Moreno was right. So the federal government, when you got the right people in there, when you got the progressives and Marxists in there, they saw these opportunities. States aren't acting fast enough. We will. And they did it, and they're doing it. Coolidge also warned us about the growth of government. Quote, no plan of centralization has ever been adopted which did not result in bureaucracy, tyranny, inflexibility, reaction, and decline. He went on to further argue that unless bureaucracy is constantly resisted, it breaks down representative government and overwhelms democracy. And folks, we have seen every one of these things happen because of actions by the federal government outside of constitutional bounds. Now, Coolidge brought down the debt, had a surplus, he brought down taxes, and all sorts of things. And another historian, Peter Zavodnik, wrote that, quote, the pace of centralization slowed during the 1920s, but federal involvement in agriculture, labor relations, and education continued to expand. Grant and aid programs flourished, unquote. Wow. Both Harding and Coolidge may not have completely been able to roll back the administrative state that had been established under Roosevelt and Wilson. Nevertheless, their policies were rooted in the tradition of the American founding. Coolidge's beliefs and commitment to federalism was similar to another American president, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. Now, Ronald Reagan, who was the first to actually challenge the New Deal and the Great Society framework set up by FDR and also LBJ Johnson, Reagan called for a return to traditional federalism and more authority transferred back to the states, which that tells us the federal government had taken it away. President Reagan's administration was influenced by the spirit of Calvin Coolidge when his portrait was hung in the cabinet room to symbolize the philosophy of Reagan's administration. Coolidge and Reagan also believed not only in traditional constitutional government, but also in reminding the American people about the values of the American founding, which we here at the Medlock Post are trying to do. Coolidge stated, quote, we may wonder at their need of constant restatement, reiteration, and defense. But the fact is that the principles of government have the same need to be fortified, reinforced, and supported that characterize the principles of religion. After enumerating many of the spiritual ideas, the scriptures enjoin us to think of these things. If we are to maintain the ideals of government, it is likewise necessary that we think of these things. Unquote. So Calvin Coolidge, Ronald Reagan, using not only their government understanding, but their religious understanding, which is what the founding fathers did in establishing the Constitution, putting it to work in government. Coolidge, just like Reagan, preached the principles of the American founding, and just as a prophet, sometimes they were a lone voice calling in the wilderness for the nation to repent of progressivism. You get that? For the nation to progressivism, which is Marxism. Nevertheless, Coolidge and his administration fought the good fight to restore the constitutional limited government and restore constitutional principles such as federalism. Today, Coolidge's warnings in regard to federalism have come to pass. The federal government has increased its power in regulating the economy, and the states have become administrative districts. Folks, we've talked about that. States are now dependent on the federal government, not vice versa. The federal government today stands as a powerful Leviathan. Moreover, the cost of the administrative and welfare state is at an all-time high, and the current national debt approaching $32 trillion threatens the economic security of our nation. Presidents Roosevelt, Theodore, and Franklin may attract more attention and glamour than Coolidge, but today's policy problems demonstrate that we need a Coolidge and not a Roosevelt to restore the republic. Amen. How many of you are now thinking, wait a minute, is this what those radical, rebel, insurrectionist Republicans in the House of Representatives are trying to do? Are they? Have you really sat down and listened to what they're trying to achieve? Yeah, we're going to get into that. Put some things here into perspective. Coolidge, Calvin Coolidge, 30th President of the United States, overlooked by historians, a lot of them, had a moral view of the economy. There's a fundamental aspect of Calvin Coolidge's philosophy, and it was his refusal to separate economics from morality. He saw them as one and the same. This was especially true during Coolidge's presidency. In a speech delivered to the Federation of Jewish Philanthropic Societies of New York, he said that he regarded, quote, a good budget as among the noblest monuments of virtue, unquote. A good budget as among the noblest monuments of virtue. How many times have we heard, live within your means? Certainly not the government philosophy, is it? Coolidge also believed that the issue of taxation was a moral issue. He stated, realizing that the power to tax is the power to destroy, and that the power to take a certain amount of property or income is only another way of saying that for a certain portion of his time, a citizen must work for the government. The authority to impose a tax on the people has been most carefully guarded, unquote. These are great principles that are trying to be espoused by some Republicans in Congress today. And they're being attacked for it. The safeguard which Coolidge referred to was the constitutional mechanisms of checks and balances and separation of powers, which are foundational to the Constitution. Coolidge argued that, quote, these precautions have been taken because of the full realization that any oppression laid upon the people by excessive taxation, any disregard of their right to hold and enjoy the property which they have rightfully acquired, would be fatal to freedom, unquote. We're trying here today to put a total perspective on what has happened and what is happening in America to take away and limit citizens' freedom. And taxation is one of those. Regulations. 87,000 new IRS agents. Coolidge's moral economic philosophy, or economy and government as he called it, was tied to his devotion to the Constitution. For Coolidge, keeping a budget in balance with reasonable tax rates was not just sound economic policy, but also both proper and constitutional. A limited federal government was not only the best economic policy for growth, but it was also moral in the sense that it protected economic liberty and the Constitution. What sound principles we have gotten away from. Coolidge also understood that economic policy could be abused and moved in an unconstitutional direction which could threaten individual liberty. This was especially true with regard to excessive taxation and unchecked spending. That is why both he and Harding made economy and government a pillar of their respective administrations. Coolidge warned us, quote, a government which lays taxes on the people not required by urgent public necessity and sound public policy is not a protector of liberty, but an instrument of tyranny. It condemns the citizen to servitude. One of the first signs of the breaking down of free government is a disregard by the taxing power of the right of the people to their own property. It makes little difference whether such a condition is brought about through the will of a dictator, through the power of a military force, or through the pressure of an organized minority. The result is the same. Unless the people can enjoy that reasonable security in the possession of their property, which is guaranteed by the Constitution against unreasonable taxation, freedom is at an end. The common man is restrained and hampered in his ability to secure food and clothing and shelter. His wages are decreased, his hours of labor are lengthened. Unquote. Has he just described today? He knew, just like the founding fathers knew, that if you go beyond the constitutional bounds, you create tyranny. You hurt the citizens. You take away their virtue. This is what's happened in America. This is why Calvin Coolidge is not liked. This is why they don't talk about him. As vice president under President Harding, Coolidge understood that the difficult nature of the fight to implement economic policies rooted in limited government. He understood that. In 1921, the Harding administration was confronted with a severe economic crisis, the Depression of 1921, 20 and 21, which saw high unemployment rates and a major downturn in business. Harding's response was to restore the economy by returning to constitutional principles, which meant slashing taxes and spending and paying down the national debt. Both Harding and Coolidge saw these policies as not only essential for returning prosperity to the national economy, but also as fundamental to preserving limited constitutional government. Coolidge described his pursuit of economy and government as, quote, a full test of our national character, worthy of our highest endeavor. An out-of-control budget and high taxation were a major threat to our nation. Really? Yes, really. He said this, quote, we must have no carelessness in our dealings with public property or the expenditure of public money. Today, the government does not consider it public money, but their money. Back to Coolidge, such a condition is characteristic either of an undeveloped people or of a decadent civilization. Strong words, folks. Back to Coolidge. America is neither. It stands out strong and vigorous and mature. We must have an administration which is marked not by the inexperience of youth or the futility of age, but by the character and ability of maturity. And I might add wisdom. Seek wisdom. Back to Coolidge. We have had the self-control to put into effect the budget system, to live under it and in accordance with it. It is an accomplishment in the art of self-government of the very highest importance. It means that the American government is not a spendthrift and that it is not lacking in the force or disposition to organize and administer its finances in a scientific way. To maintain this condition puts us constantly on trial. It requires us to demonstrate whether we are weaklings or whether we have strength of character. It is not too much to say that it is a measure of the power and integrity of the civilization which we represent. These are strong words, folks. They come from the Founding Fathers. They come from the Constitution. They come from people like Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump and others that have sat in that White House that understand this. And it's being thrown out the window, or has been. The pursuit of economy and government was an uncompromising goal that Coolidge achieved while president. Quote, the very fact that the federal government has been able to cut down expenditures, decrease its indebtedness, and reduce its taxes indicates how great is the accomplishment which you have made in behalf of the people of the nation, unquote. The result was a sustained period of economic growth and expansion during the 1920s until they forced Herbert Hoover, the Federal Reserve, forced a depression upon the people. Coolidge also leaves us a warning today that if the federal government and the citizenry drift away from both economy and government and constitutional principles, the result will be devastating. He said this, quote, "One of the chief dangers of the success of popular government is that it will throw away self-restraint and self-control and adopt laws which, being without sound economic foundation, bring on such a financial distress as to result in want, misery, disorder, and the dissolution of society." Folks, we are there. Bring on financial distress as to result in want, misery, disorder, and the dissolution of society. Right before our eyes, folks, we are seeing this and have been watching it for the last 50 plus years. Coolidge's leadership reminds us that budget and tax policies are as much a moral issue as an economic issue.
Because we're a great nation, our challenges seem complex. It will always be this way. But as long as we remember our first principles and believe in ourselves, the future will always be ours. And something else we learned. Once you begin a great movement, there's no telling where it'll end. We, the people. We, the people, tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We, the people, are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell the people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document in which we, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do. We, the people, are free. But man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. Nothing is less free than pure communism. We must keep up our guard, but we must also continue to work together to lessen and eliminate tension and mistrust. It's still trust, but verify. It's still play, but cut the cards. It's still watch closely, and don't be afraid to see what you see. You won every battle with every call you made and letter you wrote demanding action. Well, action is still needed. This national feeling is good, but it won't count for much, and it won't last unless it's grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs production. So we've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. If we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. Let's start with some basics. More attention to American history and a greater emphasis on civic ritual. And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. Goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
Ronald Reagan, ladies and gentlemen. Ronald Reagan, he and Calvin Coolidge were on the same page. Do it by the Constitution. Do it by morals. Do it by values. Do it by principles. Those things have been forgotten by many people. To remind you, about in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, and if you younger people, you probably have not been taught this, it was a contentious convention. There were times, there were arguments. Benjamin Franklin one day stopped it and said, let's just go home and cool down. And they came back the next day and started with prayer, and everybody had thought over things, and they were able to work it out. Now, it's interesting, but people forget this. People forget how a constitutional republic works. That's why you need to read and study the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We're not a democracy. We're not a mob rule or majority rule. We're a constitutional republic. We send representatives to Washington to represent us, we the people. They've gotten away from that. Now you have some representatives up there says enough is enough of the swamp, of the status quo. Now, Sebastian Gorka came out yesterday. Twitter, I love it. Twitter yesterday was lit up with all this stuff. But you know what? There was a lot of support for those going up against Kevin McCarthy, who is the status quo, who is the swamp. Now, I've even got friends that disagree with me, and that's fine. But Gorka said this. He got to put things into perspective. I had to laugh when I read this. Regarding the vote for Speaker, see how hard it is to rig an election when there's no drop boxes and you verify the identity of everyone who's voting? Boy, that was a stab in the back to a lot of people, wasn't it? Yeah. Now, Matt Gaetz posted yesterday, and he says, we're not trying to dictate terms. We represent our constituents. Kevin McCarthy has no ideology. He's a vessel through which lobbyists and special interests operate. My team are the people in Florida and who sent me here to fight for them. Hear that. That's not a radical. That's not an insurrectionist. That's someone who understands they represent the people, and the people are telling him, we want change in Washington, D.C. We don't like what they're doing or have been doing. And Kevin McCarthy is part of the problem. Now, Matt Gaetz is not the only representative that is posting that. They're saying, the people in my district back home, every one of them that I'm hearing from, want McCarthy out. The polls have showed it's like 70+% want him gone. 80% want Ronna McDaniel gone, the head of the RNC. They want her gone. They want a change of leadership. They look at the elections, which basically were a failure to some extent for the Republicans based on what McConnell did, McCarthy did, and Ronna McDaniel did at the RNC. They prevented good Republicans from being reelected or being elected. Perry yesterday, Republican from Pennsylvania, was on with Larry Kudlow. 13-minute 14 minutes. Larry, I was watching this yesterday. I make sure I try to, at 4 o'clock, turn on Larry Kudlow on Fox Business. It's the best show on cable network, news show. Scott Perry came on, but before that, Kudlow had been thinking, hey, McCarthy, you need to stand up, give us direction. We need to be focusing on lower taxes. We need to be focusing on the economy. We need to be focusing on the heck with Ukraine. We don't need to be sending money over there and overseas. We need to be doing away with the green policy. We need to stand up and talk about it, lay it out, and then you could be elected Speaker of the House. So Scott Perry comes on there, and Kudlow lays this out to him. Scott Perry is one of those that's not voting for McCarthy. And he says, we can't keep doing the same things and expecting a different outcome. And folks, that's the definition of insanity. And that's what he said about McCarthy. He says, we need to change things. We got to get out of this congressional gridlock. We've been there before, folks. And right now, let me ask you this. What is so pressing out there that the House needs to be doing something? What? What? Oh, we need to pass a bill to stop the 87,000 IRS agents. Well, pass the bill. What's going to happen to it? It won't even go to see the light of day in the Senate. And if they pass it, Biden's going to veto it. So it's not going anywhere. Well, we need to pass a bill to do this and this and this. We need to pass a bill about the budget. No, the budget's done. You can pass all these bills that aren't going anywhere. Understand that, people. They only have a 4 or 5 seat majority in the House. They can pass bills. Democrats are in control of the Senate. Schumer's not going to put those bills up for a vote. Let's get realistic here. Nobody's getting realistic. Oh, but McCarthy put out this commitment to America. Have you read it? There's nothing of substantial importance in there. It's a bunch of gobbledygook. It's a bunch of the swamp stuff. There is nothing in the agenda of the GOP to date to address the real issues, putting America back on track to being America. None of those issues are on the table. And this is what these GOP congressmen in the House of Representatives are trying to make a statement about. We're not addressing what needs to be addressed. We're not addressing the southern border. We're not addressing the drugs that are coming across. We're not addressing the drug cartels that are basically running the border. We're not addressing the drug deaths from fentanyl in the United States. It's killing hundreds of thousands of people. They just overlook those things. The media overlooks the important issues. So now you have these Republican congressmen that are trying to bring the Constitution and these important issues to the forefront that McCarthy and Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell will not do or did not do. They want to change the status quo. Now, there was an article yesterday on the Red State by Brandon Morse. He says, Matt Gaetz's words about Kevin McCarthy define the current state of the Republican Party. The ongoing struggle to find a Speaker of the House has been fraught with disagreement on the Republican side of the aisle, and for good reason. And the red wave that never was, and the passage of the omnibus bill, Republican lawmakers and voters alike are sick and tired of the GOP establishment being the Igor to the Democrat Party's Dr. Frankenstein. Or Igor, I'm sorry. That's right. The Republican Party was the water boy for the Democratic Marxist. Kudlow made the point to Scott Perry, well, you know, he stood up to McConnell and said, don't support the omnibus bill. Don't do it. But, folks, he's voted for all those bills in the past. Every one of them. And Scott Perry made that point. I'm sorry, but he did make Kudlow look a little out of touch with things. I hate to say that. I like Larry Kudlow. But he says, Larry, Kevin McCarthy has voted for every budget bill forever. Whether the Democrat bill or whatever, the continuing revolutions. Oh, let's not shut down the government. See, what's so bad right now if the government was shut down? What's so bad about it? Nothing's happening. All right. So anyway, he goes on in this article. A number of Republican officials are absolutely refusing to vote for Kevin McCarthy, a politician who exemplifies the GOP's penchant for being Democrat light and one of the men who sat back and watched the Republican Party flounder during the midterms. After the passage of the omnibus, the House Minority Leader is looking less like a leader and more like a liability. Yeah, so he threatened the Senate Republicans. He's trying to make himself look like a strong leader to get reelected, which should have been already done weeks ago. But the bill was already done. The 18 GOP senators had already agreed to it, to that omnibus bill. They were part of the negotiations. So McCarthy, oh, don't do it, to try to make him look strong. Well, Scott Perry made the point yesterday, we've heard these talks from McCarthy before. Larry, whether he says what you want him to say or whatever. But it's lip service, said Scott Perry. I've known that. Other people have known this about Kevin McCarthy. It's lip service. Has gone way past lip service now. He's kissing the ring of the Democrats. So Scott Perry made this point. He says, we see the talk, but we've never seen the walk. And there's a big difference there, folks. Back to this article. Florida Representative Matt Gaetz is one such man looking to stop McCarthy from obtaining the gavel. Earlier Tuesday, he gave a short speech to reporters about why he's resisting the GOP's main pick, and embedded in his words was something that might have defined the Republican Party in its current state better than any other. Gaetz began by revealing that he and others were threatened to be taken off committee spots if they didn't vote for McCarthy, but Gaetz said his position was that if someone like McCarthy were in charge, then there wouldn't be any teeth to bite. If all Republicans have is the ability to bark, then the committee assignments mean nothing anyway. You get that? McCarthy is part of the swamp. He sits at the table of power and doesn't want to give it up. If all Republicans, he further said something very poignant. Quote, I don't want to relive the Benghazi experience where it was just theater pretending to be oversight. Go ask Trey Gowdy about that, who ran the committee and the investigation, and it got buried. Republicans were in charge. Right now, the Republican Party, this is back to the article. Right now, the Republican Party is about as dangerous as a revolver without any bullets in it. It just looks threatening. The GOP is all flash and noise, but it doesn't have the willingness to fight meaningfully against a Democratic Party that has become unquestionably radicalized. McCarthy is, for all intents and purposes, a perfect reflection of the Republican Party as gets described. Theater pretending to be oversight. Oh, let's do all these investigations. Let's investigate Hunter Biden. Let's impeach Biden. But McCarthy hasn't agreed to that yet. Well, I think it's a waste to impeach him. The Senate's not going to convict him. They're going to hold about a 2-hour trial and vote, and that's it. I've even written articles about that, the stupidity of that. Back to the article. No one should be surprised that McCarthy is failing to get the votes because Republican politicians are only doing what their voters told them to do. They're there to drain the swamp and restore order to a political body that is clearly out of control. If the GOP is so upset about this, then perhaps they need to stop asking why politicians like Getz are so unwilling to fall in line and begin asking why the GOP establishment is inspiring this kind of rebellion within its own ranks. Great question there, folks. Look at it from the other side, from the different perspective. Then, oh, these are a bunch of rebels. Wait a minute. Why are they being rebellious? Why were the founding fathers being rebellious and wanting to break away from England? Of course, back to the article, we'd all rather see a Republican in the speakership position, but if that speaker is just going to ask how high when Democrats say jump, then what's the point? Minor victories mean nothing in the face of massive losses, and with McCarthy, many voters see exactly that. Minor victories, but massive losses. We've witnessed this for years and years and years. We got some major wins under Trump, but he had to twist a lot of arms of the Republicans in Congress, including Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, and Paul Ryan. And McCarthy and Ryan still would not support the really big things that Trump needed to make America great again. Now, Brandon Morse has put the nail on the head with this article. He finishes up. There's no point in a Republican Party if the Republican Party won't be a Republican Party. Right? Calvin Coolidge was a Republican. Ronald Reagan, a Republican. Donald Trump, a Republican. Love him or hate him, this is back to Brandon Morse. Love him or hate him, Getz has a point, and it's one that the Republican Party should seriously consider. Amen. Brandon Morse, great article in the Red State. Bridget Gabriel quoted yesterday on Twitter, or posted, if you don't understand why 20 members of Congress are refusing to cave to Kevin McCarthy and the establishment Republicans, you haven't spent any time talking to actual conservative voters. The people are sick and tired of the status quo. Kevin McCarthy is the status quo. Yes, he is. I've been fighting against him for years, folks. Rogan O'Hanley posted this. He posted great things yesterday. And I'm going to say, go to my Facebook group, The Medlock Post. And I put a lot of these things from Twitter on there yesterday. It was a great going back and forth. I even made comments back. Before we get to his post yesterday, Nancy Pelosi put up a post. We've got to get back to integrity in the House of Representatives. Well, that struck my nerve, and I answered back. And I says, we got to put dignity back into the House of the House of Republicans, or the House. I said, dignity? Oh, you mean like the time that you stood behind Donald Trump after his speech to the nation and tore up his speech with him standing there? That type of dignity, and the type of dignity when you stood there and support killing unborn babies? Is that the dignity you're talking about? Well, guess what, folks? I got a lot of people that liked that comment. And many other of my comments that I put in there, that I went after. All right. Rogan O'Hanley, no matter who gets elected speaker, this has been a massive moral victory for MAGA voters. They sent a shot across the establishment bow that we will not bend a knee to their will. Rona is on edge. Speaking of Ronnie McDaniel, who's head of the RNC, McConnell is now on notice. And we the people are just getting started. Folks, this is the debate that we need. This is the debate that we should have been having before the election. This is what the Republicans should have been talking about to get reelected. We should have had 50 Republicans elected in the House. We should have had 5 to 10 Republicans elected in the Senate. But because they were status quo, it didn't happen. And now we the people are mad. And we're telling our representatives that will listen, do something about it. Well, that's what they're doing. Change of leadership in the GOP. And that's what this is all about. To get back to the Constitution. To get back to sound economic policy. To get back to moral principles and virtue found in the Constitution. This is what this is about. This isn't about 20 radical, rebel insurrectionists. Now, if you consider wanting, and well, let me put it this way: the media, the Democrats, the establishment Republicans think, and some American people think that by going back to the Constitution, to having sound economic policies and lowering taxes is insurrection and rebellion and radicalness, then I'm all for it. This is the battle today, folks. It's cut and dry. There's no gray area here. None. And that's what we're talking about. I wouldn't plan on doing that, but I'm going to play We the People. This goes back to the Obama era. Listen to this.
Dear President Obama, we, the people, have stated resolutely we reject your vision for our country. You claim you have not heard us. We, the people, have assembled across America resisting your efforts to subvert our Constitution and undermine our liberty. You claim you have not seen us. Since you have not acknowledged our message, let us here present it once more. For if, as President Wilson said, a leader's ear must ring with the voices of the people, the time has come. Our greatest treasure is freedom, the absence of restraints on our ability to think and to act. The corollary of freedom is individual responsibility. We believe in the power of the individual. A few years ago, President Bush said, "History moves toward freedom because the desire for freedom is written in every human heart." Let us add that we will preserve it only as long as devotion to freedom is expressed in the heart of our actions. When President Lincoln dedicated Gettysburg National Cemetery, he declared, "It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so nobly advanced." That unfinished cause for which our soldiers willingly go to battle and for which so many have given their lives is a free United States of America. It has been nearly 150 years, and the work President Lincoln spoke of is not finished. In fact, that work will never be finished. Freedom is the capacity for self-determination. It is not an entity, but a condition, and conditions change. Freedom can expand, yet so can it contract. You promised change when you took office, Mr. President, but subjugation is not change we wanted or will accept. You have expanded government, violated our Constitution, confounded laws, seized private industry, destroyed jobs, perverted our economy, curtailed free speech, corrupted our currency, weakened our national security, and endangered our sovereignty. By compromising our nation's cultural, legal, and economic institutions, you are ensuring that our children will never achieve the same quality of life as we enjoy today. Through generational theft, you are robbing the unborn of opportunity. This is not acceptable, not in America. We did not become a strong nation through hope, but rather through self-reliance. No one better understands the relationship between individual achievement, dignity, and strength than our armed forces. Through every war, our soldiers have held this nation's destiny in their hands. They have not failed us. They cherish freedom enough that they are willing to die for it. Our duty to them and to ourselves is to treasure freedom enough to live up to it. We accept the challenge, Mr. President. That is why we are assembling across the land to deliver our message to you as often and in every way we can. Dismiss us at your political peril. Our great nation is a republic. We will not accept tyranny under any guise. Your policy to redistribute the fruits of our labor is statism and will not be tolerated. By our honor, Mr. President, we vow forever to resist coercive government in America. Patriots will not stand silent as you attempt to dismantle the greatest nation on earth. We, the people, will defend our liberty. We will protect our beloved country, and America's exceptionalism will prevail. God bless the United States of America. Sincerely, we, the people.
I get chills every time I listen to that. That was put out by the Tea Party in 2010, addressing what Obama was trying to do to fundamentally transform America. Trump put a stop to a lot of that. Biden picked it right back up. See, Hillary was supposed to continue it, but she lost. Now Biden's there. They've fast-tracked everything. and they're not slowing down. We are the ones that need to slow them down. This is the battle today, folks. And now we have 20 or so Republicans in the House of Representatives willing to stand up and fight this fight and to take the heat for it and to not back down. This is America, folks. Let it be America. Go back to the constitutional values. Boy, we have run out of time today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a follower. You can go to, I'm asking you to go to my Facebook group, The Medlock Post. There are two. One's was just Medlock Post, but the public one is The Medlock Post. I have my blog at medlockpost.blogspot.com. I'm on Twitter at Richard G. Medlock. I need to set up the Medlock Post Twitter, don't I? I'm on Getter as Richard G. Medlock. I'm also on Truth Social as the Medlock Post. So there's a lot of ways to follow me. If you go to my public Facebook page, the Medlock Post, you will see a lot of things I post there that contribute to this program. Now, not everything I put on there I agree with, but it's what people need to know what's going on. All right. Time is up for today, folks. Really, I mean, time is up. So, Funk 49, folks. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a supporter. Fight the good fight, folks. I'm trying to get you to think, to ask questions. Do your homework. You know what's right. You know what's wrong. You know what's been happening. You know what needs to be stopped. Let's do it together. Thank you so much. Funk 49. Great song. Look it up on your favorite music app. Funk 49. Let's do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. May God bless America. May God bless you. Keep the good fight.